Hi, I'm Stuart. Welcome to my channel, or welcome back. Thanks for viewing my video. In this video, I want to give my review of the 30th anniversary edition of the Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury. This is a book I read in my youth, and I remember loving it. I started thinking of this book again a while back when Pat at Book Chat with Pat 868 was reading this book as part of one of the science readathon, as part of one of the sci-fi readathons she's taken part in. She really liked it. And on a recent library visit, I saw it, so I decided to borrow it. This book does have an introduction added by Bradbury. He talks about the history of the book, how it came about. It was really quite interesting, and as with many things of that type, I couldn't help wonder if something had changed along the way, that he wouldn't have become a successful author. This book would have never come out. It's kind of interesting how people you hit that fork in the road and you take one instead of the other, and that changes your life. But it did come out, it was very popular. This book is a loosely connected group of short stories. They start in 1999 and move forward. They tell the history of people from the U.S. It was only the U.S. in the book. Tell the story of people from the U.S. settling on Mars. I will say that the book came out in 1950, and in some ways it does show that. One is that socially, it's kind of a 1950 way of thinking. All the astronauts were men, there were no women. The first women that eventually went to the moon, or the first women that eventually went to Mars, were prostitutes. They didn't actually use that word, but it was implied. So socially, the book wasn't very prescient. And another way it wasn't is in the science. Not only did, as we well know, no humans landed on Mars in 1999 or ever so far, but also there was a lot of rockets going to Mars. I don't recall the numbers, but many people went to Mars and settled on Mars. So this is definitely not a hard science book. But despite those two things, and I realize it come out in 1950, so couldn't necessarily hold those against them. But although I would say that my experience is that sci-fi writers, at least in my youth, were not that great at predicting social issues. Number one, the women getting a much bigger role in businesses and stuff, and things like being astronauts. But that aside, I really quite enjoyed the book. The first, I think, 2 or 3 missions, there was problems. I won't say what, but then the mission started to succeed. More and more people came from the U.S. to land on Mars. Was ultimately, beyond the prostitutes, there was women and children came too. And although not prescient in some ways, in other ways Bradbury was, he did write about the negative aspects of people landing on Mars. I think if a book like this came out today, people would say, yeah, he talks about the dangers of colonialism. He also talked some about racism. He talked about book banning, perhaps maybe something that germinated into Fahrenheit 451, I'm not sure. He talked about the hazards of atomic weapons. So Although not prescient in some ways, he was prescient in other ways. I would say that my view is that maybe Bradbury wasn't too much a admirer of governments. I don't know that to be sure, but just in this book, the don't necessarily come off too well. But this book was a quite thrilling book, especially as it came to its conclusion. I would say that this book is not a real happy book. There is some hope, but it's not a super happy book. The Martians are in some way very human-like, but in other ways different. That's understandable too. In sci-fi movies and books and TV shows, often the aliens are very human-like. I really enjoyed this book on a reread. It did not in any way tarnish my memory. There wasn't too much I remembered of it. And I did think there was one thing I remembered wrong, but which was kind of interesting. Memory can be a little faulty, I guess. I recommend this book to anyone who wants to read a rather thrilling, interesting, creative sci-fi book about what it could have been like to land on Mars. Oh, one thing I should mention too. The Mars had a atmosphere. It was thin, but it was breathable. And perhaps in 1950 that was still considered a possibility. So I recommend this to anybody who wants to read a thrilling sci-fi book, a bunch of interconnected short stories, says some negative things about people and how they treat a new land and its inhabitants, but very interesting book, as long as you can get past the fact that some of this book is quite dated. And as I said, I don't have a right to expect a 1950s book to be real to 2025, be real to 2026, but I am reading it in 2025 and 2026, so can't help wonder about some of the stuff. Was going to rate it 4 stars, but the thrilling latter part of it made me raise it to 4.5. Quite enjoyable book. It did make me think too about maybe rereading some other stuff of my youth, specifically Isaac Asimov, who was my favorite writer of my youth. And I think I will do that at some point, maybe sooner rather than later. I would be interested if you've read this book, if you did, what you thought of it, if this is a book you might consider reading. I would be interested in knowing if there's any other classic sci-fi you've read you might recommend. If you can't think of anything else to comment, please add a rocket emoji or a planet emoji or a alien emoji or emoji of your choice. I hope you're having a wonderful reading week. I hope you're having a wonderful week in general. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, please subscribe, please hit the bell to get notified when I upload future videos.